everyone, this is lesson 523. This is on completing the square, which is an extension of the last lesson. And so we ended last lesson kind of going over how to complete the square without maybe having to show all those detailed steps. And I did mention I was going to kind of show you a more formal way. So here is maybe something that might help some of you kind of picture what we're actually doing, or you want actual steps to follow in order to complete the square. So this is what I was describing, but I didn't actually show you like algebraic steps. So this is definitely something you should have in your notes. It looks more complicated than what it is, but I think you should definitely just have it in your notes as a reference in case if you ever have to ask yourself, like, wait, how do you complete the square? These would be steps that you could look at. And then if there's something you don't understand about this, then you could reach out to me and ask questions. So this starts off, let me explain it as hopefully you're copying this down right now. When you're given an equation in standard form, right? So you should remember standard form where quadratic equations look like ax squared plus bx plus c. We have these letters a, b, and c. So those are referenced in these steps. So if for some reason a is not equal to 1, a lot of the equations we've been solving have 1, or you don't see a number in front of the x squared, which means it's a 1. But if it happens to be some other number like a 2 or a 4 or something like that, then you need to divide everything by that number. So if it was a 2 in front, then I would divide everything by 2. All right, so that would probably be the first thing that I would do, because your goal is to make sure that that first term is a 1. And I think I might go over one problem specifically like that towards the end. But besides that, if a is a 1, then the first step is already done for you. Next is to write the quadratic in this form. So you'll notice there's just the x's by themselves on the left side, and then the number on the right side. So you should remember this from the steps we've seen before. I would always move that c value to the other side first. That was always the first thing that I did. So your goal is to make it look like this. And then the remaining steps, this is kind of like the shortcut that I was talking about, or are kind of doing and showing you. And I think I actually made a mistake when I solved it the last lesson that I corrected. But the reason why we have these labeled with like B's, A, B's, and C's is so that I could tell you whatever this number is in front, this B value, we're going to be using that B value, and we're going to divide it by 2, and you're going to square it. All right, so we're going to do that, and we're going to add that number to both sides. So let me highlight that so it's clear. So we're going to add that to both sides. All right, so you'll notice there's still the x plus bx, and there's still the c. Only thing we're adding is this number to both sides. So sometimes in my notes I'll say like, oh, what's the magic number? What's the number we need to add to both sides? So that's how we generate that number. So if you know what b is, if you know what this b value is, then just divide it by 2, cut it in half, and then square it. Multiply it by itself. All right, so, and it's okay if it could be a negative value, it could be a negative number as well, and it still works the same. But this will always be a plus. This will always be a plus. Right, you're always going to add it to both sides. All right, so once that's done, that's really the hard part. The next part is factoring. So when we factor the left side, it's always going to be a perfect square. It's always going to be a perfect square. If you get this number correct, you're always going to have a nice perfect square. And you'll notice inside here we have a b divided by 2. Right? So there's a b divided by 2 in there. It's still using this b value. So if you cut it in half, that's going to tell you what goes there. So even though it's just a factor, you kind of know a shortcut is just put b divided by 2, whatever that b value is, positive, negative, even, odd, doesn't really matter. And then you'll notice this still stays the same. All right. And then if at that point, that's pretty much perfect square form. If you could simplify these numbers, you would simplify it. But for the most part, if you're going to end up solving it, you're going to end up doing the square root to both sides. These are the steps that we've seen before. And then you'll be left with something like this. Don't get mixed up with all the letters at this point. I think the most important is just getting to perfect square form. So step 4 in this process is really your goal. Once you're there, you probably know how to solve it using your algebra skills. And so I'm not going to solve this completely. I don't want it to get too confusing, even more so with all this stuff. So you could probably even forget about all this. I don't want you to get too mixed up. But if you are going to solve, take the square root of both sides and then keep going from there. All right, so this is kind of, this is pretty much what I was doing before. I actually found these steps even online that I saw someone else had it, and I'm like, yeah, that's perfect. I'll use that. So I thought that was pretty good. All right, so let's practice using these steps. We just have a few problems to do in this lesson. It's a lot shorter than the last lesson. But now that we have official steps, so hopefully you have those in your notes and you could see those, since I don't actually have them on the screen with us. But I will hopefully say them as I'm using them. All right. So, all right. So here we have our equation, x squared minus 6x plus 7 equals to 0. First step was to see the a value. A value is a 1, so we don't have to do anything. The next step was to rewrite this. So I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides. And so we're going to rewrite it to x squared minus 6x equals to negative 7. So that was the form that we needed it to be in. And then now, this is the part where I'm asking for the magic numbers. What numbers? You'll notice I intentionally left some empty space here because I knew I was going to add some numbers. So be careful there. If you don't put enough space, it might get confusing. You definitely don't want to put it in front. That's even more confusing. So how do I get this number? Where does it come from? Well, that's that b divided by 2 squared that we talked about. So b divided by 2 squared. So our b value in this case is negative 6. So I'll even put that work on the side. So this is going to be, since our b value is negative 6, so I'm going to take negative 6 divided by 2 and square it. So this is going to give us negative 3 inside squared, which is 9. So I'm going to add 9 to both sides, plus 9 plus 9. All right. Now I'm going to factor this, which I already know it's always going to be a perfect square. And what is this? Negative 7 plus 9 is 2. All right, and so what's the number that goes in here? Well, that one's always going to be still based off of negative 6. So it's actually going to be negative 6 divided by 2, right? Not squared. So this is even easier. You're just going to cut it in half. So this is going to be a minus 3. All right. So now that we have that, I'm going to do, let me just rewrite it. Squared equals to 2. And I'm going to take the square root of both sides, plus or minus. And I'm left with x minus 3 equals to plus or minus the square root of 2. All right, add 3 to both sides. And we have x equals to 3 plus or minus the square root of 2. All right, and we already know that means that we're going to have two answers. So x equals to 3 plus the square root of 2, and x equals to 3 minus the square root of 2. And those would be our two answers. All right, so that's pretty much test question, right? I could totally give you that same question on a test and say, go ahead and solve this using completing the square. And this would be the process you would use. So this would be a good example of notes that you would want to use. All right, so that one was set equal to 0. I wanted to do one where it wasn't set equal to 0. And you'll notice it's already, there's not even an extra number over here. This is already set up. I think this is already helps us skip step 1 because this is a 1. Step 2 was to rewrite it. It's already in the right form. So this is even more helpful. So now the only thing I need to do is, one is I'm just going to rewrite it with some extra space because I need to add a number to both sides. So in this case, our b value is equal to 5. So what I do know is I'm going to take that 5 divided by 2 and square it. Right? It's always going to be divided by 2 and squared. So what's going on here? Well, 5 divided by 2, that doesn't go in nicely, but it doesn't have to. All right, so that's why a lot of people get stuck on this one, is because of that 5. They're like, well, 2 doesn't go into 5, so I don't know what to do. What I'm gonna tell you is you could use a calculator on this one if you want. You could go to Desmos or maybe your phone calculator and do 5 divided by 2 and then square it. So I'll just do it right now. 5 divided by 2 would be 2.5. And so 2.5 squared, right? What's 2.5 times 2.5? Oops. 2.5 times 2.5 is 6.25. All right. So I'm going to add 6.25. Oops, add 6.25 to both sides. Which usually at this point people say, well, this is confusing. Now I have decimals. This is getting too complicated. Don't even think that way because it's not as complicated as it looks. So the next step was to factor. So you might think, well, what am I going to do? I don't know how to factor that, but we do. You know that all we're going to do, oops, let me move this down here, is take 5 and divide it by 2. 5 divided by 2. So this is going to be x plus 5 divided by 2, we already said was 2.5. All right, you don't have to worry about area model or something confusing like that. As long as you know your b value, right? You already know your b value is 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. All right, so the right side, you may or may not need to use a calculator for that. 6.25 and a negative 2 is going to give us a 4.25. All right. And then let's solve this. We're going to square root both sides. Plus or minus. Oops, let me move that over. So plus or minus. And we're left with x plus 2.5 equals to plus or minus the square root of 4.25. All right. And what do we do next? Well, we still need to get x by itself. So we're going to subtract 2.5 from both sides, and we're left with x equals to negative 2.5 plus or minus the square root of 4.25. Which always, every time people see the decimals, they think it's more confusing. You don't have to do anything with this, right? If anything, you would just type it into a calculator. We still have the two answers. X equals to negative 2.5 plus the square root of 4.25, and x equals to negative 2.5 minus the square root of 4.25. All right. All right, so those would be two possible answers, or the two answers. All right, so these are the two main ones that I wanted to go over. The first one is just kind of the basics, traditional. You'll notice we have answers in radical form. They did not simplify to nice numbers. And then this one we just finished, you'll notice it was this 5 was an odd number, which meant we ended up having decimals, which is usually not fun, but I just wanted to show you it's still possible if you have odd numbers. Even numbers are the easier ones, but odd numbers are still possible. All right, same steps. All right, and then the last one that I want to do with you, I'm calling this a challenge problem, but because it does involve a little bit more steps. If you didn't already notice on this one, there's a 2 in front, which changes a little bit of what we're doing to solve this. So we'll see. I actually haven't solved this one yet. So let's see how I do. So the first step was, it says if a is not equal to 1, then we need to divide by whatever a is. All right, so in this case, a is equal to 2, so that means I'm going to divide everything by 2. All right, let's see if this works. Hopefully, I seriously, I haven't worked this out, so I don't even know if it's going to work out. I hope it does. So this is going to be x squared plus 6x plus 3 over 2. I'm going to just leave it as 3 over 2. Or it's 1.5 if you want it as a decimal, equals to 11 over 2, which is 5.5 if you want it as a decimal. So for now, I'm going to leave it as a fraction to see, unless I feel I really need it as a decimal. All right, so the first step, now that I've gotten rid of that 2, the next step would be to subtract this 3/2 from both sides. And we're going to be left with x squared plus 6x equals 2. All right, the 3/2 go away. 11 minus 3. What's 11 minus 3? So that's going to be 8/2. Well, 8 divided by 2 is 4. That's a nice number. So we're actually left with a nice number, which is pretty good. All right, so let's I'm going to leave that for now. And so we're going to we need our magic number. What number are we going to add to both sides? Don't forget our b value is, in this case, our b value is 6. Right? If we're looking at this as our b value. And so this is going to be 6 divided by 2 squared, which is going to be 9. I believe that, well, here I'll show you the steps. This is going to be 3 squared, which is 9. So I'm going to add 9 to both sides. All right, so this is going to simplify. So this is going to be x plus 3 squared, right, if we factor it. And then, like I said, 8 divided by 2 is 4. This is really 4 plus 9, which is 13. All right, that worked out to a nice number. All right, so let's simplify this more. But one last step, that one issue here that we need to do is we need to put back this a value. All right, so we divided everything by 2, right? So that 2 is really secretly still there, right? I just didn't show it to you. But that 2, really what we did was we factor out a 2 from everything. And so because we still have a 2 around everything, the very last step is we're going to put that 2 back, right? So we're going to put that 2 back. And so we're going to just distribute. So I'm going to put a 2 times this. So it's going to be 2, let me do this in blue. 2 times x plus 3 squared. And this is going to be 2 times 13. All right. So this reduces to, we're still going to leave this as 2 times x plus 3 squared equals to 26. And then we could solve this. So this is going to be, so this actually takes us back to, if we divide both sides by 2, it gives us 13. Right. So what I wanted to show you is that 2 technically never went away. It's still somewhere hidden there. So if we put it back, you'll notice we still end up with the same equation. All right, so let's solve this. All right, so let's solve this. This is going to be x plus 3 equals to plus or minus the square root of 13. So x equals to negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 13. All right, and so those, we're going to have 2 possible answers, negative 3 plus or minus, plus square root of 13, and x equals to negative 3 minus the square root of 13. All right, and that would be our 2 answers. All right, so really the only extra step that we needed was to divide everything by 2. And if anything, I could probably eliminate like these steps, right? So I'll even do that for you, right? So this was just to show you that there's technically that 2 was being factored out, and so it was okay for us to just divide everything by 2. So maybe that'll help you. I don't want you to think there was a lot more work here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this so that you can see this. So it looks a little bit like less work. All right, so there you go. All right, so we've covered completing the square. Just to kind of review, let me go back. There's our initial steps. You always want to check to see if that first number is a 1 or not. If it's not a 1, just go ahead and divide everything by that a value. And then you should be good to just solve it. Rewrite it. Make sure you know what your b value is, because you're going to do b divided by 2 squared, and you're going to add it to both sides. And then when you factor, you're going to have b divided by 2 inside the parentheses for your perfect square, and then you go ahead and square root both sides. All right, so we saw that doesn't matter if it's equal to 0, and it doesn't matter if it's equal to some other number, a negative. And then lastly we saw one where it was not 1 in front. All right. So let me know if you have more questions on this. Definitely it's challenging if you skip steps. So I encourage you to not skip steps on this one, and definitely ask questions because this is not intended to be difficult. All right, we'll see you next time. We'll see you next time.